Talia had learned the uniform before she learned the job. Not the shirt and the dark trousers and the apron tied twice at the back. The other uniform. The one you wore in your face and your shoulders, and the way you moved through a room. Eyes down but not too down. Steps quick but not hurried. Smile ready but never offered first. She had practiced it in the small mirror above her bathroom sink until it stopped feeling like practice and started feeling like skin. The Obsidian Club did not advertise. It did not have a website or a sign above the door. The people who needed to find it already knew where it was. The staff who worked it already knew the rules. Because the rules were never spoken out loud. You did not ask about the guests. You did not remember faces. You did not carry anything out of the building except your paycheck and your silence. In 3 years, Talia had never broken a single one. She was good at this work. Better than she should have been, maybe. She could track 6 tables at once, read a glass before it was empty. Feel the shift in a room's mood the way some people feel a change in weather. Her manager, a thin man named Porter who smiled with only the bottom half of his face, had told her once that she was the best server he had ever hired. He had said it the way someone compliments a piece of furniture. Useful, reliable, easy to overlook. She had said thank you. That was the other thing she had learned. How to make being overlooked feel like enough. There had been a time, not so long ago in years, but lifetimes ago in every other way, when Talia had taken up space without apology. When she had opinions delivered in a full voice and plans that stretched out past the end of the week. She had been studying for her paralegal certification. She had an apartment with a window that caught the morning light. She had a person she trusted completely. That last part was where it had all come apart. She didn't let herself finish the thought. She never did. She had gotten very good at stopping her own mind at the edge of that particular cliff, turning it around, walking it back toward something safer. The weight of a tray. The temperature of a room. The list of tables she still needed to check. She moved through the main floor now. Quiet and efficient and utterly unremarkable. A woman so practiced at disappearing that most of the guests looked straight through her without knowing they had done it. She preferred it that way. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant no questions, no connections, no loose threads that someone might eventually pull. She had built a very small, very careful life around that fact. She had no way of knowing it had about 40 minutes left. Porter found her at the service station at 8:43. He didn't say much. He rarely did. He just held out a small card with the room number printed on it and looked at her the way he always looked at her when he was assigning the private rooms, like he was handing her something heavy and trusting her not to drop it. Room 4, he said. Full service. They're already seated. Talia took the card. She nodded once. She did not ask questions, because no one asked questions about room 4. She restocked her tray, checked her appearance in the small mirror near the kitchen entrance, and walked toward the back of the club where the hallway narrowed and the lighting dropped lower, and the sound of the main floor disappeared behind her like a door closing softly. The carpet here was thicker. The walls were darker. Even the air felt different, cooler, quieter, pressed flat by the weight of whatever usually happened behind these doors. She knocked twice, the way she had been trained to, and entered. The room was not large. It didn't need to be. For men at a round table made it feel full in the way that had nothing to do with space and everything to do with presence. The kind of full that pushed against the walls. Lee Kang-Dae sat facing the door. Talia had served powerful men before. Men with money, men with titles, men who wore their importance like a heavy coat they never took off. But Kang-Dae was something different. He wasn't performing power. He simply had it, the way a room has temperature. He was younger than she expected, broad-shouldered. His collar open at the throat, the edge of a tattoo visible above the white fabric. He was reading something on the table in front of him, and he did not look up when she entered. None of them did, except one. The man to Kang-Dae's left tracked her from the moment the door opened. He was very still in the way that certain animals are still, not relaxed, but coiled. His face gave nothing away. This was Oh Min-suk, though she didn't know his name yet. She knew his type. She had learned to identify men like him the same way she had learned everything else useful in her life, by surviving proximity to them. She began to pour water. Across the table, slightly apart from the others, sat a man in a dark suit with the quiet, careful look of someone who was always listening and never quite all the way present. His hands rested on the table near a briefcase. His expression was pleasant and completely empty. Something about him made the back of Talia's neck tighten. She couldn't have explained it. Not yet. It was just a feeling, the kind that lived below thought, below language. In the part of a person that remembers things the mind tries to forget. She poured the water. She kept her face still. She did not look at the briefcase. It happened between the first and second course. Talia was at the side table, arranging the small plates for the next round of service, when she caught it in her peripheral vision. Not a dramatic movement. Not something most people would have clocked at all. Just a man shifting a briefcase from his lap to the table. Setting it down beside the decanter with the kind of care that looked casual until you understood that casual men don't move that carefully. Shin's hand rested on the clasp for exactly 1 second too long. Talia's hands kept moving. She lifted a plate, set it down, reached for the next one. Her face did not change. But something inside her went very, very quiet, the specific quiet that falls over a person when their body recognizes danger before their mind has finished forming the thought. She had seen that gesture before. Not here. Not in this city. In a different room. In a different life. When she had still been the kind of woman who believed that careful men with pleasant expressions were careful because they were trustworthy. She had learned, at considerable cost, that some men were careful for entirely different reasons. That stillness, that deliberate, practiced placement of an object in plain sight, it was the move of someone who needed a thing to look like it had always been there. She finished arranging the plates. She picked up her tray and crossed the room and set the dishes down with the quiet efficiency that 3 years of this work had built into her muscles. She did not look at Shin directly. She had learned a long time ago that men like him noticed when they were being watched. Instead, she looked at the table. At the placement of glasses and silverware, at the small adjustments a good server always made. And in doing so, she looked at everything. The decanter was cut glass, heavy, half filled with red wine that caught the low light of the room. The briefcase sat 6 inches from its base. Close enough to touch. Close enough to reach without standing. The other men were talking. Low voices, focused. The rhythm of a conversation that had been going on for a while and had found its pace. Kang-Dae was listening more than speaking. His pen moving slowly across the document in front of him. Oh Min-suk stood slightly behind and to the right, eyes moving across the room in a steady, unhurried pattern. No one was watching the briefcase. No one except Talia. She moved back toward the service table and stood with her tray held flat against her body and let herself think, really think, about what she had just seen. About what it meant. About where she had seen it before and what had followed and how that had ended. A cold, clear feeling moved through her chest like water finding the lowest point in a room. She didn't know what was in the briefcase, but she knew enough. She made it to the service corridor before her hands started shaking. Not badly. Not visibly. Just a fine, private tremor that moved through her fingers and up into her wrists and stopped there, contained the way she had learned to contain most things. She set the tray down on the metal shelf and pressed both palms flat against the cool surface and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth and told herself what she had told herself many times before in many different difficult moments. This is not your problem. It was a sentence she had gotten very good at. She had worn it smooth with use, the way you wear smooth a stone you carry too long. It had served her well. It had kept her employed and unnoticed and safe in a job where safety depended entirely on your ability to care about nothing beyond the task directly in front of you. She tried it again. This is not your problem, Talia. You don't know what's in that briefcase. You don't know these men. You don't know anything for certain, and certainty is the only reason to act, and you have learned, at great personal cost, what happens when you act without it. The tremor moved up past her wrists. Because the truth was she did know. Not the specific details, not the exact contents. Not the precise mechanism of whatever Shin Dong-hyuk had placed beside that decanter with his careful, unhurried hands. But she knew the shape of it. She knew it the way you know the smell of smoke before you find the fire. Marcus had moved the same way. She hadn't let herself think his name in almost 2 years. It arrived now without permission, attached to a chain of images she kept locked in a room at the back of her mind. Marcus, who had been her colleague, and then her friend, and then the person she had trusted with information she should have protected. Marcus, whose hands had been just as steady, just as deliberate. When he had set things in motion that dismantled her life, so completely she had fled to another city and taken a job where no one would think to look for someone like her. She had stayed quiet then. She had told herself it wasn't her problem, that she wasn't certain, that the safest thing was to keep her head down and let events move without her. She had been right about one thing. She hadn't been certain. She had been wrong about everything else. The sound of low voices drifted through the door at the end of the corridor. The clink of a glass. The particular silence of a room where powerful men were deciding things. Kang-Dae didn't know. He was sitting 10 feet away reviewing documents and trusting the man beside him, and the wine in the decanter was sitting exactly where Shin had placed it. Talia picked up her tray. She had made her decision. She hadn't meant to. But some decisions don't wait to be made. They simply arrive, fully formed, and dare you to walk away from them. She wasn't walking away. Not this time. She gave herself 2 minutes to plan and used only one. The between-course clearing was the cleanest window. It was the moment in a formal service when everything on the table was in motion. Plates lifted, glasses checked. The surface reset for what came next. Hands and eyes were busy. Attention shifted. A good server could move 6 things in 45 seconds, and the guests would remember none of it, because that was the entire point. The best service was the kind that looked like it had happened on its own. Talia had been doing this for 3 years. She pushed back through the door at the exact right moment. Tray in hand, the way she always did, moving with the particular rhythm of someone who belonged completely in the space they were occupying. She started on the far side of the table, which was correct, which was the proper sequence. Which meant that by the time she worked her way around to Shin's side, she had already cleared 3 place settings, and no one in the room had looked at her once. Kang-Dae was speaking. Something low and direct, addressed to the man across from him. Oh Min-suk had shifted slightly toward the door. His attention pulled by a sound from the hallway, some small thing, nothing, but enough. Shin himself was leaning forward slightly, his focus on Kang-Dae. His hands no longer near the briefcase. Talia reached across the table for the outer plate, and in the same motion, with the same unhurried efficiency, she closed her hand around the briefcase handle and lifted it below the line of the table and set it onto the lower shelf of her service cart without pausing, without adjusting her pace, without allowing any part of her body to announce what her hands had just done. She finished clearing the remaining plates. She said quietly, "I'll have the next course out shortly, to no one in particular and everyone in general, the way servers did, the way she had done 100 times in this room and 1,000 times before it." She pushed the cart back through the service door. The corridor received her in silence. She made it 6 steps before she stopped walking. She stood very still in the narrow space between the metal shelving and the wall and looked down at the briefcase sitting on the lower shelf of her cart and understood, with complete clarity, that there was no version of the next few minutes that looked anything like the life she had built here. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and felt the tremor move through her palms and kept her breathing steady and deliberate because her breathing was something she could still control. She thought about leaving it, pushing the cart into the back room and walking out of the building and never coming back. She thought about Marcus. She reached down and opened the briefcase. She heard it before she saw it. A shift in the quality of sound from behind the service door. The conversation stopping mid-sentence. A chair moving, the specific silence that falls over a room when something has been noticed and not yet named. Talia had spent 3 years learning to read rooms through walls. She knew exactly what that silence meant. She did not run. Running was the worst thing she could do. She looked down at the open briefcase. The interior was clean and mostly empty, which was the first thing that confused her and the second thing that frightened her. A folded document, a slim phone, and nestled in a carefully cut recess in the lining. Disguised so cleanly that you would miss it entirely if you didn't know to look. A small glass vial sealed with dark wax. Sitting inside a molded cradle that had been built to hold something exactly its size. Beside it, a decanter lining. A perfect replica of the one on the table. Already switched. The understanding moved through her slowly, and then all at once, the way cold water rises. The decanter on the table was not the original. At some point during the service, before she arrived, or in some moment she had missed, Shin had made the exchange. The vial was the source. Whatever was inside it had already been introduced, or was meant to be introduced, before Kang-Dae lifted his glass. She closed the briefcase. Behind the service door, a voice said something sharp and low in Korean. Then Oh Min-suk's voice, flat and certain, giving what sounded like instructions. She heard the main room door open and close. Then another door. The exits. Her legs felt very far away. She made herself stand straight. Made herself think in a straight line because panic was a luxury she absolutely could not afford right now. The room was locked down. Oh Min-suk was sealing the building the way a man like him would seal a building. Methodically, without urgency, which was somehow worse than if he had been shouting. Shouting meant emotion. This meant training. They would reach the service corridor within minutes. She thought about hiding the briefcase, sliding it behind the shelving, walking back and empty-handed, returning to the invisible woman she had been 2 hours ago. She almost believed it was possible. Almost believed that she could fold herself back down into smallness and survive this the way she had survived everything else, by being unseen. Then she thought about the decanter sitting on the table. Kang-Dae hadn't touched his wine yet. She had been watching. But the evening was not over. And a man like Shin Dong-hyuk did not build something this careful and leave it unfinished. Talia picked up the briefcase. She smoothed the front of her apron with her free hand. She pushed open the service door and walked back into the room. Every head turned when she entered. Not gradually. All at once. The way heads turn when something unexpected walks through a door that was supposed to stay closed. Kang-Dae looked up from the table. The two men beside him went still. Oh Min-suk, who had been moving toward the service entrance from the other side, stopped where he was and fixed his eyes on her with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite surprise, but something more dangerous than both. Shin Dong-hyuk's face did not change. That was the thing she noticed first. Every other person in the room had reacted. Shin had simply become more still. The way a flame becomes more still in the seconds before it goes out. It lasted only a moment. But Talia had been watching him all evening, and she caught it the way you catch a single wrong note in a familiar song. She walked to the table. She set the briefcase down in front of Oh Min-suk, flat and deliberate, and she looked at Kang-Dae and she said quietly and clearly, "Don't let him touch the wine." The room received this in complete silence. Oh Min-suk's hand moved to the briefcase without taking his eyes off her. Kang-Dae said nothing. His pen was still in his hand. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at most things, with total focus and no readable emotion, and he waited. So she told them. She told them about the briefcase placement, the half-second too long, the specific deliberateness she had recognized from a life she had tried to leave behind. She told them about the vial and the lining and the switched decanter and the molded cradle built to hold exactly that shape. She kept her voice steady and her words plain, and she did not look at Shin while she spoke, because she didn't need to. She could feel the quality of his stillness changing from across the table. Oh Min-suk opened the briefcase. He looked inside for a long moment. Then he looked at Kang-Dae. Something passed between them that required no words. Kang-Dae set his pen down. He leaned back in his chair slowly and turned his eyes to Shin Dong-hyuk with an expression that Talia could not fully read, but that made the temperature of the room feel like it dropped several degrees. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Shin's mask came down in pieces. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the small, terrible increments of a man who has just understood that the room already knows everything. The pleasantness left his face first. Then the composure. What remained underneath was something older and colder and much more honest. He didn't run. There was nowhere to go. Oh Min-suk moved to stand behind him with the calm efficiency of a man performing a task he had performed many times before. The room was silent. Talia was still standing. They took Shin out of the room without a word spoken above a murmur. Talia watched it happen and then looked at the table and then looked at nothing in particular while the remaining men exchanged quiet instructions and two of them slipped out and the door closed again and the room settled into a silence so complete she could hear the candles. Kang-Dae had not moved. He was still in his chair, both hands resting on the table in front of him, looking at the space where Shin had been sitting with an expression that was controlled and careful, and underneath both of those things, something much quieter. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like the particular stillness of a man who has just understood how close he came to an ending. He turned that expression to her. "Sit down," he said. It wasn't an order, exactly. It wasn't a request either. It landed somewhere in between. In the tone of a man who was not accustomed to asking twice, but who was, in this specific moment, extending something that might have been courtesy. Talia sat. Oh Min-suk remained standing near the door, arms loose at his sides, watching her with the same steady attention he had given everything all evening. She had the sense that he had already made some private judgment about her, and that it was cautiously, not unfavorable. Kang-Dae looked at her and waited. So she told him the real story. She told him about the paralegal certification and the firm she had been working toward, and the colleague named Marcus who had worn trust like a second skin while quietly using. Everything she shared with him to build a case that destroyed the people she worked for and buried her name in the wreckage. She told him how it had happened slowly and then all at once, the way certain catastrophes do. How she had tried to report what she knew and found that the people she reported it to were already involved. How she had left with nothing except the clothes she could carry and the hard, specific knowledge of what a careful man looked like when he was hiding something in plain sight. She told him that Shin moved like Marcus. That she had known it in her body before she knew it in her mind. That she had spent 10 minutes in the service corridor trying to convince herself it was not her problem. She told him that she had been wrong about that once before and had spent 3 years paying for it, and that she was not willing to pay for it again. The room was very quiet when she finished. Kang-Dae had not moved throughout, had not shifted or looked away or reached for his glass. He had simply listened with the complete, unhurried attention of a man who understood that some things deserved to be heard all the way through. He looked at Oh Min-suk. Oh Min-suk looked at Talia. Neither of them said anything, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of a room deciding whether to believe her. It was the silence of a room that already did. Kang-Dae was quiet for a long time after she finished speaking. Not the uncomfortable quiet of a man searching for something to say. The deliberate quiet of a man who understood that certain moments deserved space around them. He looked at the table, then at his hands, then at her. And when he finally spoke, his voice had lost the particular flatness it had carried all evening. It was not warmer, exactly, but it was more direct, more honest, like a window that had been cleaned. "You saved my life," he said. Talia didn't answer. It was not a question. "That creates an obligation," he continued. "I don't carry those lightly." He reached forward and turned the briefcase slightly with 2 fingers, a small, thoughtful gesture. "I have people who can look into what happened to you. The case that was built. The name of the man who built it. There are ways to correct certain records. To resurface certain truths." He paused. "If that is something you want." Talia looked at him steadily. She had thought about this moment, or some version of it. In the long, strange minutes she had spent in the service corridor after opening the briefcase. She had thought about what it would mean to be seen by a man like this. What it would cost. What shape the debt would take. She had told herself that if she survived the next hour, she would be careful. That she would not trade one kind of smallness for another. "I want my name back," she said. "Not as a favor. Not as something I owe you for. I want it because it's mine and what was done to me was wrong, and the record should reflect that." Kang-Dae looked at her without expression. "I'm not interested in working for you," she continued. "I'm not interested in being useful to your organization or protected by it or connected to it in any way that follows me forward. I'll take whatever help you're offering to correct what happened. And then I want to be done." The room was very still. Oh Min-suk, near the door, made no movement. His face gave nothing away, but she had the distinct sense again that she had passed some private test she hadn't known she was taking. Kang-Dae was quiet for another moment. Then something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. "Agreed," he said simply. He reached into his jacket and produced a plain card and set it on the table between them. No name on it. Just a number. "When you're ready," he said. "However long that takes." Talia looked at the card. She picked it up. She put it in her pocket. She stood, because the conversation was over. And because she had learned in the last 3 hours that she was allowed to decide when things were over. Kang-Dae nodded once. The way a man nods when he has encountered something he respects and knows better than to try to hold on to. She walked out of the room. 3 weeks later, Talia sat at a window table in a coffee shop on the west side of the city, in her own clothes, in her own name, with a folder open in front of her that contained the first real evidence she had ever held that proved what Marcus had done and what it had cost her. She was not in uniform. There was no tray, no apron, no careful management of her expression for the benefit of people who weren't looking at her anyway. She was wearing a dark green jacket she had bought 2 weeks ago because she liked the color, which was a small thing and also not small at all. She had not bought something simply because she liked it in a very long time. Across the table sat a woman named Renee, a lawyer with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking cases that other people had decided were too complicated or too cold or too far gone to be worth the effort. She had reviewed the folder. She had asked several very good questions. She was now looking at Talia with the expression of someone who has just understood the full shape of a thing and found it both troubling and solvable. "This is recoverable," Renee said. "It won't be fast, but the foundation is solid." Talia nodded. "You understand it means putting your name back into spaces where people will see it," Renee continued, watching her carefully. "It means being visible in ways you may not be used to anymore." "I know," Talia said. She said it without hesitation. Without the small internal flinch she would have felt even a month ago at the idea of being seen, of being known, of standing in a room without the protection of invisibility wrapped around her like armor. She looked out the window at the street below. Ordinary people moving through an ordinary morning, carrying coffee and bags and the unremarkable weight of their own lives. She had watched people like this for 3 years from a careful distance, from behind the glass of a life she had shrunk to fit inside. The folder was open in front of her. Her name was on the first page. Her real name, her full name. The name she had been born into and earned, and had taken from her by a careful man with steady hands who had understood that the easiest way to silence someone was to make the world believe they had nothing worth saying. She touched the edge of the page. She was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The deep, specific tiredness of someone who has been holding themselves very small for a very long time and has finally, in one long exhale, stopped. Renee was still watching her. "Ready?" she asked. Talia closed the folder. She looked up. She sat straight in her chair in a room where no one was looking through her, where she was not the least significant person present, where her name meant exactly what it had always meant before someone decided it shouldn't. "Yes," she said. And she was.